Welcome to the UnStruktured podcast. This week, I talk with performance designer turned regenerative farmer, Star Miklashek Hoerauf. Pulling from an active and creative childhood, Star has woven her love of animals, holistic patterns, and clothing into a mindful way of life. Carving out her early career creating award-winning performance apparel for cutting-edge brands like Arc'teryx, The North Face, and Patagonia. Star then channeled her art, knowledge, and drive to do the right thing for people and planet into becoming a true regenerative farmer. A passionate mother with a clear mind and strong will, Star now runs her own farm in British Columbia called MorningStar Woollen. I'm Michelle Rose, and this is UnStruktured. This episode of UnStruktured is brought to you by Schoeller, the global textile company headquartered in Switzerland, specializing in the development and manufacturing of high-performance fabric and textile technologies for athletic, outdoor, fashion, and workwear categories. Founded more than 150 years ago, Schoeller calls upon its vast history of experience working with the most advanced equipment in compliance with the world's toughest environmental systems. Quality and sustainability have always served as the brand's core principles, with the entire production chain, from raw materials to the finished product, intensely scrutinized. For more information, visit www.schoeller-textiles.com.
Hi.
Hi. Hello. I can hear you.
Sorry, is that really loud?
I think I have my volume up. Let me test my volume. There we go. How's it going?
I am pretty good.
I think your background is awesome.
Yeah.
You have this interesting half and half thing going on that I really love. That's you've got half of this white, it's very yin yang, but it looks like farmhouse and outside, and then you've got this like mid-century modern look, dark, cozy on the other side. And I think it shows really interesting halves of you.
Yeah,
So,
well, that whole wall back there is dark,
yeah, I love it.
cedar siding, and then there's a big donkey that I dragged home from Texas.
I love it. I love it. It speaks so much to me, like both farm and design, and it just talks about who you are. Welcome here to talk.
Thank you.
I'm glad you could join us, and I'm glad the farm travails have given you a window to hang out here. How's it going over there?
Sorry, I'm gonna stop playing. Okay, I'm closing this now. How's it going? It's going okay.
Yeah. You had power outage last week.
Yeah.
And that affects a lot of things when you live on a farm like that.
Yeah, the biggest thing being that we're off utilities, right? So we have well, and that's the biggest problem is that when our well pump, we don't have a secondary power source for it.
Yeah.
So when there's no when there's no power, there's no water.
There's nothing. You don't have a generator backup.
No, I have a little guy but by the time we could get back to the house, it was null and void. What I need is a generator for the well pump. But if I don't have water, then because the only thing, like, it's so funny how your priorities change. I can live in the house without power, right?
Yeah.
Like I have a wood stove. I have a propane cooktop, so I can light it with a match. And you put 2 duvets on and whatever, you deal with it. But it's when you have livestock, I'll be honest, I feel fairly irresponsible not having power for the well, because the minute we're without water, we're really struggling to give them their basic requirements. And the thing is that it came in as we got this deep freeze, which we get here on occasion. We don't get it very often, but it just so happened, of course, this big Arctic outflow, -12, with power out, which meant that all my hoses froze, it couldn't have been worse. But at the same time, it's not totally surprising. And here I am living this life. Why don't I have a secondary power source for water?
But sometimes it takes going through that to really have it hit home with everything in life. It's like, and I think some of us were tough it through people. And so you make do until you realize, oh my God, I'm responsible for a lot more than just
Yeah.
me or kids. The animals, when you brought that up and you mentioned that last week, and I had said, wow, I helped my parents homestead 2 houses when I was a teenager. And it
Mhm.
was comical as well, the things that we didn't know coming from San Jose to Bay Area, buying land, digging a well, building a house, doing everything ourselves, and getting a storm come in when you're not prepared for it. And
Yeah.
you don't know what you don't know until that kind of thing happens.
Yeah.
So I learned a lot in that process. So
That's cool. And that's invaluable. Like you'll have that forever.
yeah, I hated it then. I was 14, new high school, but I look back on it with this knowledge and this memory and things that I thought I would never do again. I suddenly
Yeah.
find myself wanting to do again. When you can build your own life like that. And as designers as we are, we can dig right into this. As creatives, we have visions for things. And I think that was one of the things I talked about with you before was you've had such a strong vision about how you want to do things, how you think they should be done, and what's important to you. And this is part of that, making that happen.
And it's a blessing and a curse, right? It's to have such clarity. I feel like when I listen to others and read books, podcasts, social media, whatever, that I feel somewhat unique for
Mm-hmm.
having
Mm-hmm.
such clarity.
I
But
agree.
at the same time, it's like when the clarity is there, like I feel like a bit of a freight train. Like there's no, it's pretty hard to hit the
Yeah.
brakes. And it's, yeah. And
Yeah.
I, when we talk about design leadership, I think that's one of the most interesting things is like, when do you get out of the way and
Mm-hmm.
let somebody run
Mm-hmm.
with their vision, with whatever it is, and or how do you constructively have check-ins
Yeah.
and shift that? To me, that's a real design leader is knowing that nuance between being able to observe when that vision has formed and the designer for the team, maybe it's a team, you just need to get out of the way as opposed to create hurdles for them that just get
Yeah.
everybody frustrated.
I think I was just pulling this up because I couldn't remember one of the words, but I read Seth Godin a lot, and he talks in his blog about being a linchpin versus a cog, and that
Yeah.
companies need both.
Yeah.
And they need linchpins, but they have a really hard time with that. And people like us are those linchpins. And then you need people to be cogs. And the linchpins do have a hard time existing in that place and knowing like when to step back. And so he's been saying some interesting things about that lately because he's been talking a lot about how we need artists to lead right now. We don't need managers, we need leaders. And leaders are those people that ask those tough questions and push those ideas. And companies have a really hard, or business leaders with the numbers have a hard time with that.
As
So,
business leaders, all leaders,
yeah.
look at the way we run countries or
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
it's everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like to when I read that I felt okay, I get it. I'm a linchpin. I can recognize a lot of other linchpins like people like you that I like to talk to. And I think recognizing that was really helpful for me to
Mm.
realize, oh, okay, what do I bring to a company? And saying, okay, I am this and I can identify that. And I think that was the things that I love about you is that clarity of your vision. And so having some clarity of what we're trying to do and then some working on that clarity of how to communicate it and how to work with it is part of our challenge as well.
Yeah. And I think having confidence allows, if you can create that right balance where you feel empowered in your job, in your process, and when we feel empowered, we can listen a lot better. So there's a lot more room for collaboration if everybody feels empowered.
Yeah.
And the minute you feel like your project might get shut down or that it might get completely derailed or that you're not going to have say in your fabric or whatever, like the minute these sort of roadblocks come up and the frustration come in, that's the red mist rising, becomes more difficult to stay open to the process. And I don't know about yourself, but I know for me that in the right circumstances, I am one of the most collaborative people. I love collaboration. Creative synergy is the best.
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't want to design in a silo. It's like farming in a silo. I can tell you it's not that fun.
Yeah.
I really like myself. I don't like myself that much.
To just be alone like that. There are people who do like that to some point, but
I need it to a certain extent. Like I go crazy. Part of the reason why I've chosen my lifestyle is some self-isolation. And some of that is outright frustration with the way the world is today. And I feel like I can be a better person in the world if I am more isolated, and then meditate more and be more of a positive collective consciousness rather than being, in traffic trying to be a good person, because
and
with that.
now you also, I spent my time really in-house in the brands, daily 9 to 5, often longer than 9 to 5. And you have either contracted or traveled in and hadn't had a little bit more of that flexible time as I've viewed it. I don't know if that's totally true, but
I earned it.
is that true? Yeah, is that true? And does that help you in your work?
This is the way I see my sort of in-house design cycle. I earned that flexibility. Like I busted my ass when I was at Arc'teryx, when I was at Helly, which was a shit show, but I worked hard. I was 1,000K in 4 months or something, right? Like I worked really hard in my 20s and early 30s, and I proved myself. When I was at the North Face, I was bringing more product to market and winning more awards, or just in like bringing more unique ideas to market on the apparel side, not on the equipment side or the shoes side. Because I love a lot of the people that I worked with in equipment and shoes, not as much as it would have been fun to collaborate, like Jake Rivets and his team. And he had some really wonderful people come through under him in footwear. And then like Tay, oh my gosh, and Loesch and Greg and all those guys in equipment.
Yeah.
I hope I'm not forgetting anybody, but
there were a lot that came through, right?
Yeah, and they were doing amazing, cool shit. So I'm not saying that, but just on the apparel side, I remember sitting down with Jim Gerson once, and he was like ticking off all the sort of R&D special projects that were on the go on the apparel side. And he's, oh yeah, oh, that's Star. Oh yeah, oh, that's Star. Okay, Star's overseas.
Yeah.
So I earned it. And then I feel like when I stepped back and had children, I could coast. And I don't mean coast as a designer, coast in terms of my hours in the office. And
the need for flexibility.
Like I had proved myself with that team and those people and earned enough respect that I could have that flexibility. And then as the people that were coming in moved up through middle and senior management, I'm not going to name any names, and they started to challenge me in my senior position as a part-timer. It took about, I don't know, 6-8 years for people to be like, you know what, if you really want these leadership roles, you got to come back. And
they wanted the FaceTime. That was when I was there. And that when FaceTime was really important, which created a struggle for me as a new mom as well. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on as well, but because that's a huge piece for us as creative women, leaders, parents. Like it's really important to talk about how necessary it is for that flexibility. So but earning it, putting that time in and bringing in the sales and the product and the newness. And you see where a brand has come to, like the brand like the North Face, you shepherd that through really rough times and help get those sales up growing during a recession and really challenging times that now it's top brand in the world and outdoor and beyond. And all of us who had a part to play in those different brands that we've played with, that's what I love about talking about this. There's their story in there. There's people see that and say, wow, what a great opportunity. And you go, yeah, it's a shit show in most of these companies. And it's always changing. So the company that we worked at a certain time, it's not like that anymore. It's different people. Totally. It's always changing. It's always evolving. And so are we.
And as it has to. I think when I was in school, that was the biggest thing they tried to tell us. I've always been not a big growth person. I remember when I started at the North Face with the Easy E and going up to a sales meeting, and he had this thing that like every time he said like growth or something, I don't know, you had to tap your body somewhere, and like the salute was like take a shot or something. I can't remember. Anyway, there was some little gesture we were all supposed to do every time he said like growth. And I love Mike Eject, but that whole little speech, I was like, I don't think exponential growth is fun. I don't think it's sustainable. And I don't think that it is the way. Like I've always been this sort of reluctant designer in that we balance bringing tons more product into the world by believing that you're doing high quality product that's going to have a long lifetime, that's going to bring people joy, being in the outdoors. And like being in the outdoors, like we all know, absolutely. Anybody knows, it can attest to the fact that being in nature regulates your nervous system, right? Yeah. So we all need to be connected to nature more. And so that was why designing outdoor gear, I could always come to grips with pumping out a bunch of plastic, but I didn't think like this.
Oh my God. And the trajectory that it was on was so insane.
Yeah. And it's a challenge of our society. It's like, how do you, so I remember what I was going to say is I remember in school them saying like watching all these brand life cycles, you know, and how like you had to hit this spot on the curve in order for innovation and like growth and continuation, all these kind of things. And if you hit that flat part, if you hit that plateau, then you were doomed. Eventually you were going to tank. They could never maintain that nice plateau. That you always had to have this sweet spot. And I struggled with that. I get it in terms of there needs to be a certain amount of energy, right? So that the products are seen, and you need to have turnover in the market floor so that people want your brand in there. And the brand needs to be visible enough that people are like, oh yeah, I believe in this. And I see people wearing it, it must hold up, whatever. Yeah. So like, I get that, but yeah, that's the piece I struggle with, because I personally believe that sustainability should be the thing, not growth. And how do we infuse energy? And is it a change in thought and process, or is it literally not possible? I don't know. I know that to be small and flat is hard. And
absolutely.
So I don't have an answer.
I think also I don't think I think nobody has the answer right now, because that is the place we're at everywhere. We've hit this place where the 20th century, the Industrial Revolution, was about growth the whole time. And then we hit the wall with it. We've hit it with climate issues. We hit it with too much product. We've realized that we can make more product than we need. And the problem is we've built lifestyles off of selling lots of product and credit card debt and all of these issues, right?
Totally. And it's exactly the same as a Canadian. It's exactly the same challenge or predicament that I observed in the medical care system. Because when I was living in the United States, I was like, this medical care is crazy. Of course, I don't want to get into a big political conversation, but of course I'm, pro-choice and pro women having access to proper health care without having to pay for it. You know what I mean? Like, so to me, that seems like a natural thing. And so I was a bit involved in Planned Parenthood and stuff in the States. And I think what I observed having children in the US, because two of my three were born in the States. And what I observed is that because, so I was in-house at North Face, had great insurance, blah, 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 blah. And then because of John, had to relocate. And I had Cobra or whatever. And it was like, well, you better have a baby quick, because you might not have insurance in 18 months. But anyway, so I had to manage that insurance myself. Like I had to pay monthly premiums and stuff. And then when I had my first baby without health insurance, I had Cobra, but I didn't have insurance per se. And what I learned is that there's this negotiation process between the hospital and the insurance companies and you, and they're
Yeah.
hashing it out. And they're like, if you just want to pay us cash, it'll be this. But if we go through the insurance companies, it's going to cost this. And I realized in that moment, I was like, holy shit. We will never have national healthcare, affordable healthcare in the United States because too many people in the middle are making money. It's not the
Exactly.
doctors or nurses. It's not the hospital staff.
No,
It's the insurance companies and the administrators. There's this huge
Yep.
waste
Yep.
of arguing about who's going to pay it.
Yep.
And it's just
And
like,
it's big money. It's big
it's
money.
huge.
You can, I can have my beef. I have my beef with the insurance companies, not just in medical, but in most areas with that. But the medical one is the biggest, and pharmaceutical. And those are the two to me that are sucking all the resources out of the medical and helping to drive unhealthiness in the country to help push more business
Their
there.
mandate.
Yep. Yeah. And I think once you realize that, then you don't see a way that you can change it, you feel just hogtied, and same thing as, part of the conversation I did want to have here is that being a professional woman in corporate America, this is one of the biggest challenges for me. Same thing, having a child and having a big job that I had to commute to, and having to, even though I had great insurance and it covered most 80% of my income, the amount of paperwork that I had to do to get 80% of my income during that time, even though I worked so hard, it was really struggling when you're trying to actually have a child, go through all the challenges of it and deal with everything once you have one, and childcare and everything you have to manage. To have to deal with that, you definitely don't feel cared for in so many ways.
So in those times, I think your child and my middle child are close. I think that you started at the North Face. When did you start? What year?
2007.
So Mila was born in 2005. So you joined just as I was going to Patagonia.
Yes. And then you came back a couple years
later. And then I
later.
came back, and that's when you and I were there at the same time. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
When I had Mila, I took 2 weeks off work. And even in those 2 weeks, I answered email. I didn't travel for a few months, and the North Face was okay with that. And they were super supportive. They sent me like baby gifts and stuff. It was pretty cute. Anyway, once I went back to work, I was living in Pittsburgh and working in California. So I was flying from Pittsburgh to California. And my mother was in Vancouver, and I was flying my mom to meet me in San Francisco, traveling with the baby, renting extra hotel room for my mom. And so the baby was with me all night long, not sleeping, because you got 3-hour time change. Like I would go into those PLM meetings and I would have not slept. And then the minute I get back, my mom's
right. She needs
your baby.
Yeah.
Oh, I've been trying to keep her occupied on the streets of San Francisco all day.
Oh my God. That was the thing about traveling too, doing an Asia trip for 2 weeks and being away from your child, and your partner is taking care of them. And as soon as you get home, you're exhausted. You want to rest, but they are incredibly exhausted. So you get parent duty. So there's no time off. And it's something that I don't know. I met maybe one man that I worked with who seemed to be sharing equal stress with his wife on the family front. But most of the time, I didn't see it with the guys. They had somebody home taking care of their child. And I didn't feel that same camaraderie and support around me. And the women that were becoming parents at the same time as me were having a lot of the same issues. And a lot of people ended up leaving. And I continue to see that.
And it's humiliating, right? Like I remember hiking through the office. Thank God the North Face is in California, which is this progressive state. I almost called it a province. Anyways, that would make all of you guys crazy. But anyway, it's pretty progressive. And so they had the little closet for you to breastfeed in, which was, or not breastfeed, but pump. You're hiking around with this bag. Yeah. And it's so humiliating. You're walking down the halls with it. You know that everybody knows what it is. And then I'm storing my milk in the company fridges. I was like, oh my God, if half the men in this building knew that my breast milk was in the fridge, they would flip out.
Yeah. And they'd
be horrified.
But they would.
And then it was like, and then you're trying to I traveled with a breast pump during do you remember like the lockdown like in 2011.
The lockdown.
Yeah, you weren't
Oh.
allowed to take any bags on airplanes. Like you had to take the laptop out of the case.
Maybe that still happens now. 2011 was when I had my son, so there's a bit of a window there that I miss things. But I don't remember that. Yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah, there was a while there. I can't remember why.
I wasn't flying. Yeah, I wasn't flying a lot.
Airport security. I was flying from Montreal to the North Face, and I.
Did you have to take your pump out?
Yeah, they ripped the entire thing apart. They put it all over the belts, and I was like,
God.
"You realize that's supposed to be sterile,
right?
That this is medical equipment, that you have no right to be pulling my breast cups out and putting them on the conveyor belt."
Yeah.
But they don't give a shit.
And I was know what it was.
It's humiliating. And you're so tired and frustrated and emotional about the whole thing to begin with, like leaving your baby when you're pumping. And it's, there's definitely room for improvement on how to support that whole process. And when I went to Patagonia, I thought that there'd be more support there. And there wasn't, because I was contract. For their in-house staff, they have a daycare, but because I was contracted, it didn't work. You couldn't fly in for the week and leave your kid. And then in addition to that, it's that Patagonia has a very clear philosophy. I'm going to say pedagogy, but it's not. It's a philosophy. They have a very clear philosophy. They choose to follow some sort of method with regards to the design and form of their childcare. And I can't remember who it is. It's not, doesn't matter.
I think I know what you mean, because they actually published something about it too. And I can't remember what it is, but I've heard.
Anyway, their whole thing is they all sit on the floor. They like that you're supposed to come down to their level, and no pacifiers, and it's quite imposing.
Oh, interesting.
Like crunchy Waldorf mama, and it didn't.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
I was like, those rules wouldn't work for me.
Yeah. Is it anything like Montessori at all? Waldorf and Montessori are different.
It's not Erickson, of course, but it's more of, I think it's a person's name, like Montessori. Waldorf obviously is a person's, but I believe it is a person's name, and it's sort of a philosophy to being with young kids. And I'm now a Waldorf educator, and I don't agree with it.
Yeah, that's hard. I've made choices to not join certain companies based off of certain philosophies they require their employees to join, because of things I'd known about that or experienced with other people. And they're just some companies I just won't be part of. And that, to me, that instead of adding to our flexibility that we need, it becomes that rigid thing that you have to drink the Kool-Aid. And I don't think that's something you need for community, personally, that you need everybody to drink the same Kool-Aid. I don't think it's the thing that is the cohesion that we need, personally.
No, I think, it's hard, because I understand wanting to take a viewpoint and support that completely. But I also feel like when we adopt strong viewpoints, it means that we are narrowing and judging, or even not judging, but not including. It's exclusive.
It's not an inclusive sort of thing. And having been part of a martial arts community that I think in early days, I've seen it impose its rules on certain people that fought back on it and opened up. But that feeling of, okay, you need to be clear on what you're doing here. It's not a philosophy you're trying to get out into the world. You're making product for people to get out and be in the outdoors and be healthy. And you can make any kind of choice. Any brand can make any kind of choice about the kind of people they want to have there. But it needs to be very clear and upfront. And that's why some of the brands I won't join, they are clear and upfront. And so then I can make that decision right away. But I do see that there's the contractor issue. I've seen many times over at lots of companies where they'll be really great for their employees and they'll hire plenty of contractors, but the contractors don't get the same benefit. And there's more and more people are becoming contractors right now as well. And I don't know where the numbers stand with that, but more people are requiring flexibility. So I'm wondering how these companies are responding to that change. There's a lot of conversation about it, which I think is great since COVID. That has really brought a lot up.
Yeah.
But I'll have to tell you a funny story too before we dig into family. I want to dig into early childhood stuff for you, but I'm going to tell I might cut this out, but it's just, I have to share my breast pump story. And this was one of those times when I've just had one child, so it's one experience. And I had to do my first, 2-week trip to Asia when my son was a few weeks old. And so I thought, oh my God, I get to actually sleep on the plane, right? I haven't slept a full night in a year since I was pregnant, since I had him. I hadn't slept, I was so loopy. So I was super excited to get on that plane, fly to Asia, long flight, get 12 hours of sleep if I could. And I sit down and I start to feel the pain in the chest. And my eyes just went, oh shit, I forgot my breast pump.
Oh my
I
God.
forgot a hand pump, a breast pump, anything. And they're closing the door and we're about to take off. And I had nothing. And instead of sleeping, I spent 12 hours learning how to hand express in the bathroom, bruising myself. And then as soon as we landed, we had to go right to the factory. And I had to have one of our team who spoke Chinese talk to one of the people there and ask them to go buy me a breast pump. So they went and bought a breast pump. We're working in the office and she comes walking in with a little bag, hiding it, super quiet. She hands it to me. And I go to pay for it. And she said, no, it's okay. Go ahead. And I said, oh, thank you. Thank you. So I have to go pump in the public restroom at the factory while people are going in and out, making the noise in that. And it just was that feeling of, oh my God, this is my life. Nobody taught me about this. Nobody told me about this.
Yeah. And it's humiliating.
It is on every front. And I was so glad there were so many women there to support, but it was all very quiet and very secretive. But luckily I was going to a factory where there's lots of women working and they very much understand what you need. And so I was fortunate there. But oh, that feeling that I had sitting down as my boobs just started hurting.
Oh my God, I can't imagine, but I never forgot that.
Yeah. But as we said, you learn as you do it. You know, I'll never forget that again. And then I learned how to hand express. I'm sure a lot of people want to hear about that, and they have to. This is what women have to go through. But I want to dig back into your childhood. And I was listening to a podcast that you were on, hearing a little bit about where you came from and growing up with your family, because I found it really fascinating too, because you've always had images of you when you're young with animals and seeing you with the farm here. I wanted to hear that story and I wanted to see if you would talk about that a little bit, because the sense I got from it, we're kids in the 70s, right? And it felt like your parents were, the picture that got painted in my mind was of like the Sunshine Family dolls. Do you remember those guys? They were like Barbie dolls, but they were natural and they were like a full family of like flat-footed in sandals and natural hair, and they all had a camper and they gardened. It was like the 70s family, natural family, like the family from Family Ties when they were first starting out or something. So tell me a little bit about growing up. You guys, you grew up in Madison, right? You were born in Madison, Wisconsin. Is that where you were? What's your starting, your foundation?
So I was born in Madison, Wisconsin. My dad he went to medical school, University of Madison. And my parents separated before I was conceived.
Ah, okay.
The math around that.
Yep.
They separated for the first time before I was conceived. So I did not grow up with my dad, although my dad being a doctor and being born in the 70s, he was able to be in the room when I was born because he was a doctor. Daddies weren't at that time. So he delivered me, or at least he was there, cut the cord. I don't know, whatever. But yeah, didn't really grow up with my dad. Yeah. My mom both my mom and dad were weathermen in the 60s, living in Chicago.
Weathermen?
Weathermen?
On the news?
No, like weather.
Like what?
Weather Underground?
What's that?
Okay, so this is so interesting. Nobody's heard of these guys, and yet they were out like, I don't know, maybe 5-10 years ago. Okay, so the Weather Underground were a political activist group based in Chicago in the 60s. They were anti-war Vietnam.
Okay. Okay.
Or anti-Vietnam War protesters. And my dad, being a medical student, was not drafted, of course, and he practiced illegal medicine in their apartment because the weathermen were definitely on the FBI wanted list.
Okay.
And they were also towards the end connected to the to the Black Panthers. Pink Panthers. Oh my God. Black
I
Panthers.
love it.
So
Black Panthers are my neighborhood here. Their original headquarters were down the street. Yeah. So.
Yeah. But the weathermen were non-violent. They were peaceful.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly enough, most of the people involved in the movement came from middle class, which I guess for protesting and political groups, it's unusual.
Yeah.
They were middle educated university students mainly.
Yeah.
My parents got very involved in that. My mom was running a printing press, doing the newsletter at their apartment. Brother was already born. And so they started getting bomb threats. Once things got more, started to get violent. And that was when my mom was like, we're out, you're coming or you're staying. And she left. So she went back to Wisconsin. And anyway, so eventually, my dad graduated from there. I was born, blah. We left. My mom was quite political. She was a math teacher with a master's in mathematics. She loved John Lennon and her funny little glasses and purple tights. And she wanted to get back to the earth. And so she met my stepdad and the two of them decided that they were we actually, when we first came west, I think we're on our way to California, had some friends that were living in a commune in California and wanted to explore that. Got there, and the whole free love thing wasn't really for my mom. She was still a fairly way down deep inside. My mom's actually somewhat morally not morally conservative.
Maybe traditional.
She's
understand.
She's socially restricted.
Yeah, I understand. My mom was similar.
Yeah, she doesn't want to be naked and run through the woods. She's very feet planted on the ground. So she wanted change. She wanted new ideas. She wanted to be healthier and be more natural and all these kind of things, but she didn't want to lose her footing.
Yeah, my mom was very similar because I think we have a lot of little similar pieces, but my parents were in California, but my mom grew up right in the 60s. I was born in early 70 and conceived in the summer of 69. And she didn't like the whole hippie free love thing as well, but she really loved the music and the art, and not so much the political, but the idea of everything changing in the world. And when she said, and then it got weird. And when it got weird, that's when she was like, I'm out for that, change direction.
Yeah. So in the case of my mom, it got violent, but she was still very much involved in the university and my mom was one of the first non-administrative women hired by IBM. She went school teacher, being a programmer.
Wow.
And anyway, she's very limited by social constructs, I think would be she doesn't want to offend anybody. She doesn't want to piss anybody off. She's quite congenial. And still, even here in Vancouver, so I had my first babies in Pittsburgh. I breastfed standing in closed bathroom stalls because in Pittsburgh, people don't breastfeed. I actually had a woman that I thought was a friend tell me that she thought breastfeeding was gross. I was just like, what?
There's a lot of
feeding your baby formula is gross. So
it's not natural, but we're coming that's still, it's amazing that was still a thing. I'm so surprising.
It's still in the state of Pennsylvania illegal to bare your nipple in public.
Oh, it is. It's ridiculous.
People do not breastfeed there.
Yeah.
They'll put Coke or Gatorade in their bottles, but they don't breastfeed. I was like, when I had a baby in Pittsburgh, I was so out of my element. And I swear to God, commuting back to California and working at Patagonia was my savior. I was so there were so many things that happened to me that I'm not even going to bring up here. Not the right place. But I so unbelievably, I didn't really understand what provincial meant. Brought up in this sort of very big ideas, although my mom is not there anymore. It's funny how our brains get so rigid as we get older, but
that's true. things get harder. But I can see where with some of these early years, the seeds planted during a key time for you, that first 5 years of development too.
Yeah.
This is setting the stage for some big thinking.
She was an independent thinker. She still is to a certain extent, and had big ideas, and is super bright and loves community, and she wanted to be a change maker. And so she took her 2 kids and her boyfriend, my stepdad at the time, they bought an old van and we moved. They had like a ham radio, walkie-talkies.
Yep.
We moved I still have images in my brain of that drive, believe it or not.
Oh yeah, yeah. I bet.
Yeah. But so I would have been 3 and we moved. So and I don't remember any visiting. I do remember a lot of different hippie farms, and I don't remember anything about, but my understanding is that we did stop in California for a little bit, but actually then we settled in Oregon.
Okay.
And that was a really interesting experience because my name was Star and my parents were hippies, and we landed in a small ranching and lumber town called Philomath, Oregon. I did not fit in. My hippie parents were not welcome.
Why was that? Because I don't know Oregon at that time. I didn't know it until the 90s. So what was that? Why did that not work out?
Because progressive thought is in bubbles in Oregon.
Yes,
there's
true.
a lot of very conservative, extractive based industry, mainly logging at that time.
Yeah.
And
all the bubbles are along the I-5 corridor.
They did not.
Yeah.
Sorry, my outspoken. Yeah. Anyway, but my mom's super smart. And so she was programming at this point and got a job. I think they didn't work for a bit. They built a house. My parents built a house.
Okay.
Talk about inspiring a kid to be able to do anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my God. That's homesteading. That's homesteading, basically.
Yeah, it was, but my mom never really, it was. But they called it the Back to the Earth movement, right? The whole Earth catalog, and she had a lot of friends that were weavers and artists and pot growers. Anyway, so we did that. We had some goats, but they both realized that they needed an income in the long term. So they both went back to work. My stepdad was working on calculators for Hewlett Packard, and my mom was programming sawmills for ATA. Anyway, so they're both in computers stuff. And my brother and I went to these public schools that were not so kind to us. And it was interesting. And then they went back to work to pay for the thing. And then the minute they went back to work, they couldn't keep the animals in anymore. Like the goats would all the time. And we had hard experiences. Like we had geese, and the geese couldn't keep their eggs, and we were like, what's going on? And so Bob tracked him, and we were so excited. We wanted to go. We figured out it was a possum, and the possum was at the compost pile, and blah 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 blah. You're all excited, and you want to solve the problem, and you're and then next thing we know, here's my sort of pacifist intellectual parents burying 8 BB guns into the head of a possum. I'm just like, it's just
overdone. Yeah. This is the other side of the Back to the Earth movement. Like I said, I have the same kind of experience with my parents moving up to the hills and trying to dig wells, and the rain coming in and our ceiling almost collapsing, and all of these things there was actually a made-for-TV movie with Molly Ringwald when she was like 15. That was about the whole thing about all these people from LA with the shitty city kind of stuff and wanting to get out up into the hills, having these same experiences.
So funny. I have to find that.
I'll find it for you. It's tough to find, and it's not on the streaming services, but I found it on YouTube at some point and posted it because it was my experience almost exactly. Yeah.
My parents were engineers. They were pretty good. The only thing I remember is they designed our house to be a shed roof. And it was like 2 stories on the front towards the river, and then 1 story at the back. And so they made the end walls as a 2-story frame and then propped it up. You don't get snow in Oregon very often, but of course that day we had gotten like some slush trying to get this thing up. and the bottom broke loose and started to skirt out.
Oh my God.
And I was 5 or 6 years old. I thought they were all going to die. Their
Oh
friend
my God.
was just like, oh my God.
Oh
And
my God.
I don't remember why it stopped, but it did. The only time I really remember things going for shit. For the most part, I also know that we had a cougar and they didn't believe me. I'd go out at night to feed the goats and I knew it. It was in the field. I could see its eyes looking back at me.
Oh my God.
And they were like, no, it's just a deer. I'm like, that's not a deer. Deer's on the side. This one's looking at me. I'm like, I know animals, but in the headlight or the flashlight, well, that's not a deer.
It's just your imagination. Oh my God.
But I have stories of me doing that to my children too that are really funny. So anyway, yeah, so we tried to do the back of the thing. We grew a few plants. It wasn't super successful, but it was a really nurturing somehow. Like I loved those goats and I loved caring for the goats. And there was something so nurturing. And when we moved to the city, it all went for shit. And then we moved to Canada and that was hard. And single mom, and you probably don't know who Clifford Olson is, but Clifford Olson. There were weird times. It was the first time I felt poor. We lived in some mixed housing. My mom was on her own.
So you start to get an awareness of your status at a certain point in our lives.
Or just that was a bit of a hard time.
Yeah.
Loved my stepdad a lot. I don't feel a lot of loss. Sometimes I feel lost in my dad because my dad and I talk sometimes, but I didn't feel the same loss. Like losing Bob for me was like a bad breakup with a boyfriend. Do you know what I mean? There was still loss there. And yeah. So it was tough moving to Canada. My brother had before we left Oregon, he'd gotten really into BMX racing. And so of course he dragged me into BMX racing because I wanted to. And so we got paper routes, and we paid for our bikes, and we had fancy bikes, and I was on a race team, and that was all super fun. I was the only girl.
Nice. Love BMX. And I didn't get to do BMX. I had a bike that we'd ride around, but I didn't do the racing. But how old were you then in Canada when you started getting into that?
I was 8 when we emigrated.
Okay.
Yeah. And I raced until I was probably 11.
Okay. Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then you
won everything. I had a lot of trophies. And then towards the end, we had created a girls category and it had gotten more competitive and I wasn't winning anymore. I just didn't progress in the skills. Like it sort of came naturally to me when we were little.
Yeah.
I was just sort of a getter and
and then it shifts as we get older. Some things stick with us and most things don't from that age. There's a few people that stick with that. Did you do other sports and stuff up there?
Yeah, I played ringette, so we couldn't skate. I skated once in my life in Oregon and I fell in love with it. It was just like for me, riding a bike and ice skating are just this sense of freedom. You never get running. Like running, you just never felt like you could get there fast enough.
No, I roller skated because I was in the Bay Area. There was no ice skating unless you went to the ice skating rink, which we did do, but that fell out of fashion at some point. But it's the same thing, that propulsion, you know, but you're able to be on your feet. It's a little different than skateboarding. All the guys were getting into. So but having that single thing on each foot. I did a little water skiing too, and having that individual foot movement that you can do. Because I didn't grow up skiing either. I didn't grow up in the snow. So.
I grew up skiing too. When we moved to North Van, we could take the bus to the local mountain.
Nice.
So took us to the ski swap. We got shitty, cheap secondhand skis, and we didn't care.
Yeah, exactly. Nice.
Kids pants, and we didn't. My mom was a single mom, and she's ended up doing very well. But there was times when things were a little tight, and we were scrappy, man. We were scrappy kids. And it was like 70s and 80s.
That's how we invented things. That's why so many of us became artists and creators at that time and built new things. Like when did you start sewing and making stuff?
I got my first sewing machine when I was 8 years old. Yeah. So my mom didn't want me to sew on her machine. I started hand sewing when I was about 5. My mom's always been a sewer. So my mom didn't find a lot of time to sew because she was so focused on her career.
Yeah.
But my grandmother, who I never met, she died when my mom was young, was a tailor. She worked at a bank, but she tailored all her own wool suits. I still have the doll clothes that she made for I was really into dolls.
Yeah, me too.
So was my mom. We're a doll family. And so her mom would hand sew all these clothes for her dolls, and then I inherited all that stuff. And anyway, there was a real sense of belonging, I think, around all that. The sewing and a really deep sense of, this is my tribe. This is what my family loves and does. And I really shared and connected with my mom around that. I don't remember her ever really teaching me. I surpassed her. My mom's meticulous and I am not. I make shit up as I go along.
Yeah.
And
she really probably follows the pattern.
What's that?
He probably follows the pattern to a T, right?
And the notches and pins at every inch.
Yeah, I'm just too impatient. Oh, get it done.
If it says to baste, I'm basting on the machine. I am not hand. My mom was hand based. I'm like, no.
My mom went through a quilting phase too, where she had to do the back to the earth, jamming, jarring, canning, blah, 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 and making quilts with the full hand basting and every piece till after a while, she's just screw that. Yeah. At some point you just go, there's a reason why technology moved forward and we can, right. But it's nice to try it.
And it's so empowering. Like I sew things by hand now. Like when doing my Waldorf teacher training, of course I learned why to sew before they learn on a machine. But yeah, so anyway, my mom had a machine and she didn't want me to use it. She was quite protective of it. And I wanted this Holly Hobby piece of shit plastic.
I remember that.
She's like, okay. And then for my 8th birthday, she bought me my own sewing machine. And rather than buying me that Holly Hobby toy, she went to the secondhand shop and she bought me a Singer, not a Featherlight, but that type of thing. It was like the black cast iron.
Yes. Yep.
And beautiful. But it had, I don't know if it had been converted or if it had always been electric, right? Because there was a time when they still did that same body with electric. Mine was, it did not have a hand crank or a treadle.
But it would have the cord, the brown fabric cord. I think I learned on one of those as well. Yeah. And I don't know if it was converted, but yeah.
Yeah. I took that thing to boarding school.
Those things are freaking heavy too. Oh my God.
I love that thing. I love that thing all over the place. I took it to design. I love that thing. And anyway, my mom gave it to me.
So by then you're already just off and running with, I get so much of that because there's so much that's so similar where you get that artistic craft. It's very a feminine side because that's what women were doing back then, but alongside the sport and the DIY and be outside and be with the animals. And it's this combination artistic, tough girl identity that I think a lot of us in the outdoor design industry relate to. I think that's why we get gravitated towards it. And that West Coast kind of living really supported that all up and down that whole seaboard.
And I would take that a little bit further and to say, for me, it's really about living in my body, right? Really connected to my hands, my body, and how that movement and making things is so essential for my well-being.
Oh, that gives me chills. I resonate with that. That resonates with me in a big way because it's the hands, it's the creation of something with your hands, but also that whole body movement. And there's something in that connects to the mind, body, spirit connection and that health and that connection to the planet, to the universe, to the animals, that interconnectedness that we feel. And there's an intuitiveness that we pick up and that gets filtered into the design work that we do and the way we exist in these companies, but it also contributes to the challenges that we feel because we're so connected and sensitive. The thing you're good at is also the thing that is the most challenging.
Oh my God. When will being a passionate person ever be easy?
I don't think that's
I
the
love your
reason.
passion, but I can't stand being in the same room with you.
Yes, because my passion is also your struggle. And that's where it comes from because you're so passionate about it. But also thinking about your mom, your parents, but especially moving into your mom here is that my parents were engineers as well, draftsmen, and that technical mind with the artistic mind, that right left brain, that was always a big piece for me. And I can identify other people who are so much the same. And you were saying, I've heard you say that education was really important to her. So that was something that you were going to really head towards as well. And so, how did that filter you into learning about design and school after school, college, that secondary education?
I struggled in school. I'm dyslexic.
Hmm.
I didn't do very well. Back then, I ended up going to a private boarding school for the last couple years. My mom moved way up north to Rupert, and you can imagine how, like, I hate to use this pun, but I was a fish out of water, right? I really had a hard time. It's a tough town,
Mm.
and there's a lot of pain and suffering there. And
Oh,
for a sensitive person, it hurts. And so and plus there's no sunlight.
that makes it much
you,
harder.
you take all this like pain and suffering, especially like with alcoholism and
Oh, man.
coastal communities can be pretty painful. And then you mix that with lack of daylight. You're just, oh
Oh,
my
yeah.
God. Like
Yeah.
just seasonal depression is just like rampant. And then of course the alcoholism. Anyway, I was tough. I didn't like it up there. I didn't see a lot of opportunity. At that point I was a city kid. Like I used to save up my money to go to San Francisco and shop at the Esprit store.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yep.
no, I
Yep.
was a feisty little independent, doing my own thing, right? And
Yeah.
hope to have some friends along the way. But so we moved up north. I hated it. I'd rather go to boarding school. So I got myself into boarding school. I did that for 2 years. That was totally painful in a different way
Where
because
was it? Where was it?
I went to Brentwood College.
Where's that?
It's on Vancouver Island.
Okay. Okay.
It's an
Mhm.
incredibly beautiful place. And I had given up the bike a long time ago, but at Brentwood, I learned that I could have autonomy if I was training on a road bike.
Mm.
That's how I could get off campus and have
Yes.
space to
Yeah.
myself. So
Yeah.
I got really into road bike riding.
Freedom.
Freedom.
I get that. Oh, yeah.
School is a little,
Yeah.
especially for somebody that doesn't. I don't want to like sound like I'm hard on myself or feel sorry for myself because that's not where I'm coming from. But I don't fit in.
Mhm.
I struggled socially, one, because I was too busy being myself
Mm. Yep.
there was no way I was going to conform. I thought a lot of the people there
And they
I didn't want
probably were.
them. I didn't want to be them.
Yeah.
There was a lot of privileged kids there and they were doing stupid stuff, heavy drugs, lots of sex. I was like, I wasn't interested.
Yeah. That
And
was what was going on back then.
yeah. And so the bike and my sewing machine, and for the first time in my life, I thought my teachers gave a shit. My teachers really cared.
At
And
the
they finally, my mom had me tested my whole life. Why is she getting bad grades? And why this and why that? If you talk to her, she's plenty intelligent. What's going on? I could fix the math on the chalkboard, but I couldn't write. And when I handed in a written assignment before a word check, the teacher couldn't even tell what I was trying to say. My spelling was so bad.
It's because you didn't fit into the school system, which was geared towards the industrial world of making you a good employee and fitting in.
Yeah.
And when you don't fit in, then you're made to feel like something's wrong with you. And
Hell yeah.
that's what was going on back then.
For sure. And at Brentwood, ironically, here's this school where you feel like it's like you're being honed and
Mm.
led down a very specific path more than anywhere. Although I will say, those type of educational opportunities really see the importance of balance. They
Yeah.
really focused on you're going to
Yes.
push yourself hard in these academics in the morning. And then in the afternoon, you're going to play hard. You're going to do pottery. You're going to paint. You're going to do whatever your creative fine art is. So we had a really good balance of heavy academics. And then every other day it alternated, was either full on sports or fine arts. And for me, I wanted to be an architect. So I did drafting and I played field hockey, and I wasn't great, but it sure was a good outlet. Because it's a pretty full-on intense sport.
Oh my God, hockey's awesome.
Yeah.
Especially when you like to hit things to get that out.
It's great to be able to lean into stuff. Like,
Yeah.
so much about ourselves in terms of how we fit into the world by being able to hit up against things. And whether that is playing hockey or whether that is having a conversation with somebody in public and realizing that your values don't align and you're like, okay, I know where I stand.
You're always looking for the boundaries and pushing them to see where they are, which is what kids do until they're taught to not do that.
You couldn't take that. You could not teach that out of me.
That's awesome. I think that's what makes you that makes you what you're good at what you do. And you don't need anybody to say, don't ever let go of that, because you're already not going to. And so then you have to find those ways to make that effective, which is what you've been doing throughout your career then. So how did you decide then to study design? Did you go into that right away, or what did you start with?
No, I really wanted to go to U of O and study architecture.
Okay.
That was my
Oh,
first
that's
choice.
right. You said that.
Yeah, because of my dyslexia, I didn't get in. I missed it by 3 percentile on my English. I got 70 instead of 73. So I didn't have a 3.0 grade average, which was for a program like that was base minimum. Now they told me that because of my IEP that I could get in because the scores were like, my math is bonkers, right?
Yeah.
The other one is good enough. And so my combined scores were plenty to get in. And so they told me that I could apply for variance or whatever because of my IEP, but I didn't want to. So determined to get in whole and not have to take a shortcut.
Yeah.
So what I did is I went and took general science at SFU because I was so convinced that I was going to get straight B's and be able to transfer down. That was my dream. That was my goal. I tell you, I played JV field hockey for Simon Fraser and came out of boarding school. I was 17 years old and I lost focus on my goals to get B's pretty quick. I remember a lot more drinking than studying. I do remember actually, so SFU had this amazing thing that you could go in to the library and get cassette tapes of all the lectures.
Oh, instead of going to them.
I remember going in and listening, like going and spending like 3 days listening to almost an entire course on high speed. I would just turn up the speed. You're talking to somebody that has an auditory processing delay. So like, how much of that did I really process?
Oh my God. But you listened to it all the way through. So you can say you listened to the whole lecture, whether or not you
no B. Did not. Anyway, so yeah, I didn't do so well at SFU. I bounced all over the place for 4 years. I was still sewing for myself. I actually started volunteering at a local, like a small designer. So I was just like cutting samples and stuff for them in my free time. And back then, I loved university. I loved it. I just lived up there. Part of it's because I was partying my ass off, but I loved being on campus. I thought it was just a good place to be. And so I spent a lot of time in the library, sometimes sleeping. And
sure, you're not the only one.
So back then we could get course catalogs, right? All the universities had catalogs in the library.
Yeah.
And so I was watching fashion television. That was something here in Canada.
I remember.
And Jeannie Becker was interviewing these designers that made this dress that I had like worked off and fallen in love with because I was obsessed with clothes the whole way through, right? My own quirky sense of style. And I loved this plaid dress. And so I'm watching fashion television and I know that it's called Comrags and Joyce and Judy come on, they're interviewing and they have the runway and it's Jeannie Becker and she's interviewing them, blah, 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 blah. And it says Joyce and Judy of Comrags and it says underneath that they went to Ryerson. And I was like, Ryerson, what the frig? What's Ryerson?
Yeah. So you have to look it up.
And I go to the library, my favorite hangout, and I find the catalog and I find out that I can get a bachelor's degree in fashion design. And I was like, what?
I didn't know that was a thing.
And I was like, my mother would never support this. I'm like, my mom is like,
Mm.
get a science degree. She was really hard pushing me into computer science. And I'll be honest, it's the only A's I ever got at SFU were in programming.
Oh,
It's just the way
interesting.
my brain works. And yeah, like I had all the nerds that were like getting A's in physics when I was not getting A's in physics. I am asking me for help in the computer. I was like, what?
You grew up with.
It was just so easy. It just is so linear, right? It's very logical. You can think it through. It's, I don't know, like to me, I can see code, like numbers. I love numbers.
Yeah.
Anyway, and anybody that tells me that math is not art and math is not visual, I totally disagree. All math is proportions, right? And proportions are art and nature and everywhere.
Yep.
Anyway, I was it, and I found this thing, and I was living with my 32-year-old boyfriend at the time.
Woo! And you were how old? And you were how old?
19. It was a way to get out of the house.
Absolutely. I know what you mean.
Move out. So anyways, and he was a set decorator, so he had a very fancy life. We had fancy food. Got to buy like a cocktail dress and go to his wrap parties and stuff.
Get you into a little bit more of the fashion world too.
A little bit, yeah. So I researched and I was like, holy shit, my mother may go for this because it's a degree. At least I'm getting a degree. And so all of a sudden, because I had wanted to do architecture earlier, I had done some fine arts, but very little, like more drafting and stuff like that. I was taught from a very young age that I couldn't draw.
Oh, interesting.
Oh yeah, it was not artistic. And I was told that, but I was making stuff all the time, right? Doll houses, clothes and whatever, just making shit, not drawing. And no fine art. And I actually did a summer course at Emily Carr when I graduated, trying to get ready for architecture school, called portfolio development.
Yeah.
And I actually had a teacher there, a professor, tell me that I would never be a good designer because I couldn't draw.
Yeah. Interesting. Yep.
And you're 17 years old. You're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Talk about creating like a little insecurity. Anyway, I saw the requirements for applying to Ryerson. It said that everything had to be unique and your own ideas, and you had to have all these clothes. To me, that meant I couldn't go to the fabric land and buy a pattern. I had to make the pattern. Otherwise, it's not my own.
Yeah.
That's what I thought that meant.
Yeah.
So I
Makes
learned
sense.
to make my own patterns in the course of a couple months. I would lay out, like I'd pick things that were the right shape or size, and then I would get newspaper and I would try to measure and mark it out on paper.
Yeah.
Because I'd been sewing from commercial patterns for years, right?
So you had a sense. You had a sense, but you still get a sense of the shape and how it works and how the pieces may be laid out. And then you can figure it out from there.
Yeah. And I knew like basic things like notches and seam allowances and like stuff like that. So I knew enough to cobble it together. I made this line. I went to Little India. I had all this brocade and cool fabrics, and it was all very interesting. My stepdad was a hobby photographer. I, of course, made everything my size because I was trying it all on all the time. I worked at Starbucks at the time, and there was this girl that kind of looked a little bit like me, but prettier. And she was like Chilean and had really short black hair, which I did at that time. And she was like my size, maybe a tiny bit smaller. And I was like, oh my God, like you're stunningly beautiful and you're my size. Would you wear my clothes for me?
Nice. Yeah, you find the resources.
Yeah, so I created a little photo shoot and documented all the clothes. And my mom's, shit, dude, if you're this focused, like she had never seen me so focused on anything in my whole life. I finally found something I could sink my teeth into. And so she bought me a serger. She bought me a plane ticket to Toronto. And she and I went out there, and it was a cattle call, and there was hundreds of us. And I had to do like life drawing, like I had to drape, and I was like, oh my God, there's no way I got in. I was like so sure I didn't get in. So I made some phone calls and I panicked, and we heard about this program at Sheridan, which is a college. And I was so focused that this was what I needed to do now, that I was going to go anywhere to go to design school. And so we called this local school, and When I walked into Ryerson, I knew I was home. Like it set up like a factory. Like we had proper industrial cutting tables. We were working on industrial sewing machines. Like we had dress forms, and like it just felt real to me. It was so authentic. It didn't feel like sewing on your mommy's sewing machine or and it just spoke to me so deeply, but I was scared I didn't get in. So anyways, we haul up my mom and we do a few phone calls. We had another day in Toronto, and they agreed to do a very immediate meeting. And she took me out there. It was out in the suburbs, and a really nice college campus, but definitely not Ryerson, and all home, like domestic machines and stuff.
You'd had a taste of the other place.
Yeah. It was fake for me, but they were super nice, and they accepted me on the spot. And I thought, at least I have a backup now. And because I needed to do this, like I was just,
you found it.
and then I get home, and everything there's no email at that point. It was all done by letter still.
Right.
And I got a letter in the mail within 2 weeks that I'd been accepted to the program at Ryerson. And it was like, it wasn't even, I found out later when I got there, I got in. There was no question.
Oh, nice.
I just intimidated, but when I got there and I saw who else had gotten in, I was like, oh yeah, no, there's.
Yeah, exactly. I understand that feeling. When I went back to when I figured out there was actually a degree for fashion as well. And I went back to school later in the late 90s when I was older because I couldn't find my direction early on. And I was doing too much partying and all of that. I had to get out of that and go do martial arts and get into a community there to heal up and find a healthier direction. So it took me a while to get to design school. And then when I did, and I saw, because I didn't know what I'd already known. I'd been sewing since I was on a machine since I was 14, hand sewing when I was, same thing, doll clothes for my grandma at a young age. And you don't know what you know until you get there and you go through it and you realize, even when I got my first job, which was at Columbia Sportswear, and my boss had said, you have this whole life of experience of things that is not traditional. You didn't just do a few things and go to school and then jump into a job. You had a whole series of things that set you up at a higher level for success from your life already. And all those things that you talk about with growing up with your parents in different ways and trying different things and building stuff and learning things as you go, all of that starts that foundation that you carry through the rest of your life. So,
yeah. And I think the perseverance, and I got to give my mom credit, man, because damn, have I ever been a whiner a few times. And like, she is always my sounding board. Like I got to Brentwood, I got to boarding school. I hated it. I cried every day. I was so lonely. And then I got out to Ryerson and it was disappointing.
Yeah, you said that before.
Some of the courses were great. It was a good eye opener. I hated Toronto. I loved the music and the fashion, and that part was fun. But the people were so mean. As a sensitive person, you're just like,
yeah, it sounds very West Coast, East Coast, just like the US.
Yeah.
People are a little nicer over here.
Anyway, she was like, she did some mean things that I thank God she did. And that was, she made a deal with me. She's okay, you can start all over, because Ryerson wasn't, the only thing they gave me credit for was English 100. That was it.
Oh my God.
Because it was such a specific program, nothing else credit transferred. I just,
so you had to start over.
4 years at SFU, and now I was starting over again.
Oh my God. Oh.
And so my mom said she agreed to continue to support me financially. My mom's whole thing has always been 50-50. And she said, I will give you the same for this program, but if you drop out, you have to pay me back.
You needed to finish.
So even halfway through first year, I already owed her like $4,000.
You
like,
couldn't quit.
$4,000.
Oh my God.
So I had to finish. And thank God I did. Like, thank God I pushed through it. And then I cold called after I graduated. I actually decided I hated fashion while I was in fashion. I learned quickly that people that were really talented stayed to themselves, and that 80% of the fashion industry is the people that aren't talented enough to be the top designers, and they're not very nice because they're all insecure.
Yes. Yep.
That's what I learned.
Experienced that too.
I was like, I don't like this industry. I don't want to work here.
It's so true. It's so true.
Yeah.
And yeah, there'll be a lot of people saying what they want about that, but we know it's true. You experience it.
And yeah, it's the PR people, it's the fashion, the journalists and the I don't know, like the people that are really talented are wonderful. And all the people around them that are like coattailing it are horrible.
Yeah, and a lot of pitting against each other. I see the same thing also in the music industry. Same kind of thing. Any of those, film, acting, any of that. You get the few that rise up, and you get the whole industry around it that is feeding off of the artists that are doing things. And that's part of the challenge of being a designer and existing in these corporate environments too, is exactly what you just said.
Yeah, I mean, in a corporation, it's the same thing. At least you're all on the same team, but it's the same thing. People that are really talented are wonderful to deal with. And then the others, but the thing is that, and this is interesting to me too, that I have the self-reflection that when I have been in jobs that I felt good about myself and I felt like I had space to contribute what I was good at, I was fun. I was a good employee. I was a good part of the team. But you turn that around, and if I was not in a good space, I was horrible.
Yeah.
I didn't feel good about myself, and I sure wasn't easy to get along with.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about sticking to your guns and being passionate. I'm talking about just being grumpy and not collaborative and stirring up conflict. I'm a disruptive person, and that can be a good thing and a bad thing.
Yeah. But that's also, there's an understanding in working with creative people that, and I think you get that in the fashion industry too, once people are up towards the top, or musicians or whatnot, and everybody rallies around and gives them their space to create. If they're creating something that is really helping the company, then they'll dance around it, because they're all that's the thing that's helping to generate the money. And so they'll protect it and support it. But there's also a fight or flight thing with creators too, that if you don't feel safe and supported and you feel threatened, that's when we go into our shells. We go into whatever state we need to go into.
You go to self-preservation. It's just like any relationship, right? If you feel threatened and you don't feel safe, you're preserving, you're defensive. You can't be open and collaborative if you feel like you're not invited, if you're not respected, you can't.
Nope. Did you feel, because you spent time in Toronto and studying from the fashion industry, but then you went to work West Coast, performance, outdoor, I personally have felt a real strong difference in they both have their issues, but I really felt like the performance and outdoor industry was so much more open and welcoming and more collaborative than the fashion industry.
Totally. And the other thing is that I find there's more equality. It's less gender. And it's not to say, I'm not saying that the boys club at the North Face didn't exist. Of course it did. I never got invited to go for beers with Eazy-E, or like Damien and I hung out a bit, but like above that, I didn't get invited out. Like, but I never ever, but to me, that was a social piece. Professionally, I didn't feel unheard. I felt, are there more opportunities to be heard? Yes. If you're out socializing together, there's a level of communication that I was not a part of. If I asked to be listened to, if I came to them with an idea, I was heard.
Yeah.
And to me, we're men and women or whatever in between. So you're never going to eliminate sexual orientation. Like we're all either male, female, or something else. Do you know what I mean? And I want to be a woman. I don't want to feel like I have to go have beers.
Yeah.
Like sometimes I might, like we're at a trade show and blah, 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 and I'm feeling social, but I don't want to feel like I have to hang out with them all the time, because I don't want to. I'm not really that interested in what they talk about when they're not at work.
But I do think there's that when we talk about the FaceTime issue. So when you talk about being an employee versus a contractor, and employees are always there, and contractors or people who aren't there 100% of the time. That face time that gets you opportunities or being there in the moment. And I think that the boys club or doing sports or going out to beers or those activities, they say like the golf course for businessmen and whatnot is where things take place, right? It's the social places that a lot of things take place in. I think that's a little less in that industry. And the fashion industry seems to be something else. I'm not really sure what it is because it's very, it's a totally different beast, I think. But not being able to be there during things that might happen that you don't get to hear about. That was always the thing that I felt, okay, I have to rectify that and say, do I really need to be there for everything? I don't want to be. I want to have my own life and I want to come in and do my job and do it and collaborate. But figuring out how to make sure that you still have your footing in a company when you might not be included in all of those activities.
So I would say this. I would say that the deals that get made on the golf course are the deals that weren't straightforward. So if a company is thriving and has a healthy communication environment in the office, the deals aren't made on the golf course. The deals that are made on the golf course are subversive.
Yes.
They're not inclusive.
Yep.
They are the manipulated ones. They are the ones behind people's back, whatever. And so I think the deal on the golf course isn't the problem. It's the health of the organization
right.
that made you feel like the only place you could get your way was on the golf course.
I agree. I agree. I'm reading a book right now that just came out. It's called What Got You There? What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And it's about the habits leaders have that keep them from growing forward. And so one of those is there's 20 main habits, and one of them is withholding information, which is maybe not even consciously, but it's the idea that you're not sharing. And that's a way of withholding and controlling and keeping communication from flowing.
Yep. And it's the same thing as a patent. Because if you're investing in a patent, you're not investing in your next idea. Let them have Who gives a shit? Because they're not going to make it the same as you. They're not going to get credit for it or whatever. Like if you're really good at what you do and you stay in your zone and fuel your own creative process and create your own opportunities, you're always going to be 3 steps ahead.
And that's coming from, you always have that mindset of for the greater good. We're doing something for the greater good here. And that is what you're leading with, which makes you successful in certain things and creates those challenges for working in these environments. But always, you've got to push for that and keep pushing for that. I'd love to hear a little bit as we move into talking about your career. We've talked about some of these brands already, but I want to talk a little bit about your moving into getting your first job, because your first job was early on with a very popular brand with Arc'teryx and learning a ton and seeing how they first got started. But I love your story on how you got the job, because it's inspirational for anybody to take a chance. Yeah. People are afraid to do that.
That's how we all did it back then though, right? I guess those of us that went after what we wanted. So I graduated from Ryerson as soon as I could. I came home. I couldn't get out of Toronto fast enough. And I had ended up more on the graphic design side, even though I worked in the Comrade studio for all 4 years. And I had this interest. I was racing bikes and I was working at a bike shop and I really wanted to do a line of women's bike apparel. God, there was so much resistance to that. I'm probably glad I didn't do it. But
yeah, there was.
So I had fallen into a good job as like a junior engineer working in a factory here. And so I was doing that, but it's depressing. And that was where you really saw that old school, all the management was men and all the Bs were women. And it hurt me to watch that. And like our head of operations would come down and yell at the sewers until they cried. It was just like, you really think that's effective?
Yeah.
Is this how you retain your employees and inspire them to sew faster?
And they thought it was. That was how management was done in a lot of those factories back then.
Like you think back on it, like, Are you an idiot?
Yeah.
If that's the only tool in your toolbox, maybe you're overemployed. Anyway, sorry, Sam. He's probably not. I would imagine I was pretty young and he wasn't that young, so he may not be here anymore. But anyway, he was very heavy-handed to yell. Anyway, so yeah, so I was working at West Coast, riding my bike a ton, and it was so good to be back on the North Shore. I was living on the North Shore. My boyfriend was a bike mechanic. All my friends were couriers, and just living the life and not really liking my job and trying to figure out where was I going to go. And we're all like, all us biker people were sitting around, la la. Oh yeah, have you heard about this little backpack company here on the North Shore? Huh? What do you mean? There's manufacturing on the North Shore? Oh, that's interesting. And talk about blah, blah, blah. And so I'm like, I'm not really a backpack designer, but I'd rather work on backpacks than I would stay in where I'm at.
Yeah.
As we like get down to 2 cents to set a multi-needle waistband on these pull-on pants for Corette, California.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's pretty dismal. So I learned a lot about manufacturing. I don't regret that. Because you know me, like I like to roll my sleeves up and know how shit's done. And so I learned a lot there. And so anyway, heard about this little company and I look it up in a telephone book. So I don't think we had Google.
Nope, not yet. I don't think so.
And so I called them and my girlfriend Kate probably answered the phone. Now that I think about it, it was either Kate or Miriam. They answered the phone and I'm like, I'm interested in applying for a job in the design department. And she transferred me through. I'm like, holy shit. The phone rings and Cheryl Knopf answers the phone. I'm like, not sure
I got through. You were
now. Anyway, so I had a little chat with Cheryl and Cheryl's interesting. Your timing's really interesting because we're just starting apparel and we need apparel people. We got pack people, but we need apparel people. And I'm like, ooh. And she said, we're about ready to go to our big trade show with our first set of samples. She said, so I'm really focused on these samples right now. She said, but why don't you call me in February? I'm like, okay, done. I call her back. She takes my call and I go down there and she offers me a job.
Oh my God. I love that.
And
it's just timing.
It was timing and I had the right skills. I had the factory knowledge, the knowledge of working with contractors and sewing really supported the Arc'teryx mandate. And that is, I don't know to what extent today, but back then they were adamant that their designers knew how to make the product. Have developers, you made your pattern, you made your prototype, like we were building shit.
Yeah.
And God, was it ever gratifying. I had my own sewing machine. I was like, I'm getting paid to sew a sample. I hope you don't. You feel like you don't deserve it or something. I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah. But did you have any sense of how their popularity and how they were going to grow at that point?
I was pretty green. I don't know that I was really thinking about it. The product was beautiful.
Yeah.
I had been wearing raincoats my whole life, far west, and I remember my mom had just recently shopped for a rain jacket. And at that time, to put it in context, Patagonia's outdoor rainwear was still unisex.
Wow. And that was the early days. And so was Arc'teryx doing women's specific by then? Yep.
From the day that apparel launched, every single style, men's and women's.
Was that late 90s, early 2000s for women's apparel?
It was 97, 98.
Lines right up with Lulu and Athleta hitting there, where there was that female focus finally on women's product.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was coming from the Northwest like that.
Yeah, a lot of it started with Arc'teryx launching that line.
Okay.
And all the other outdoor brands went, holy shit.
Yeah.
New game. And Lulu was quite a bit later, right? Because I was in factories doing, so my real work it had a few different roles at Arc'teryx. My first job was, I was always a junior designer, but they wanted me, they didn't have development yet. And they wanted me, like Cheryl said, you're the eyes and ears of design in the factory. So she sent me down there. I don't know if I don't know how much of this comes through my style sense today, but in 1997 or 98, I was preferred to be barefoot. I wore massive overalls. I shaved my head a few times, had my nose pierced, and drove a VW van.
Love it.
So
great visual.
And also I had pigtails. Even back then, I wore my hair in pigtails.
You've had those. Oh yeah, that's how I know you.
Yeah. So if my hair wasn't
still have
shaved, I had pigtails. And the pigtails came out of pure necessity, right? Because I was always riding a bike. 4 years with no car. And I raced too. Anyway, the pigtails, I could get them to fit in the little straps in the back of my helmet. Anyway, and also from yoga, right? Because when you lay on the mat, having a bun doesn't work. Okay. So I was a bit of I never wore a bra. I was a bit of a hippie kid.
Yeah.
And I definitely looked way younger than I was, because after 8 years of university, I was 25. And yeah, anyway, Cheryl takes me down. We had 10 Gore-Tex sewers at that point. We were just starting our Gore-Tex factory. And she takes me down there to this little factory. It's about the size of my kitchen. And she says, Melissa, this is Star. Star is the eyes and ears of design. You do what she says.
How'd that make you feel?
And what the sewing supervisor, how she felt about me. She tells me later, I figured you were 12.
I can see that.
She was like, she hated me. She was not very nice to me.
Oh man.
But anyway, she's fine with me now. Like, we still see each other sometimes all these years later. But she'd roll her eyes at me and what is she gonna do? It's not like she didn't try to derail me or anything. She just made it.
She had to get used to her new lot in life here.
Yeah.
Her new station. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I sewed the product. I learned, and I was really involved in grading, because designers did everything back then. And with the yokes and the hoods and all these complex, like all the zipper garages and all that shit, trying to grade that stuff. Oh dear.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It was not easy.
Yeah.
And then getting all the molds made for gluing in all the zippers. And anyway, I learned more in my 2 years at Arc'teryx than I did in any educational program I've ever taken. It was the most mind-blowing time of my life.
Wow. I bet. And it was early stages for them in that, but they were also leaders, because what they were doing was building off of all of the history of outdoor and making that change. Yeah. Plus, they were doing the manufacturing there because you're talking about Western Canada. And I had heard somebody say too that, what was it, 97 is when Hong Kong reverted back to China, that there was all kinds of talent coming over and into Canada. And so that's why there was a lot of the factories, because you weren't having that wasn't happening in the US. So the technical experience that you were having up there, being able to construct it, wasn't as available.
I don't know that it had much to do with Hong Kong. Maybe.
I just heard that story before around the timing, that there was a lot of talent coming over. I've heard people say that and talk about it, and I thought it was interesting. I think the point too is, like, when they say that with all of those brands like Arc'teryx coming up and doing that manufacturing domestically, like I said, that wasn't happening nearly as much, especially at that technological level in the US.
Yeah. And I'll be totally blunt and honest about my opinion of that. And I feel that has a lot more to do with business opportunity than it does population. Some of it may be population. We do have a really strong Asian population. And yeah, so of course there's incredible needlework that comes out of most of Asia. A lot of our sewers were from Vietnam. On the pack side, a lot of the sewers are from India.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know about Hong Kong. Hong Kong were there sewers though in Hong Kong at that time?
Probably not, but yeah, so it may not be the Hong Kong story that is the thing.
To me, it was more about money. That in Canada, we were committed to Canadian manufacturing, that the government invested a lot of R&D money into Arc'teryx, and we still had some strong outerwear factories in the area. We had a lot of factories in Vancouver. And whether that be because of a lot of those factory owners are Asian, right? So whether they're Taiwanese or I think mainly Taiwanese and Chinese.
Okay.
And so maybe the factory owners were coming from Hong Kong.
Maybe that's what we're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, that would make a lot more sense.
Yeah.
But a lot of the people that I work with that own facilities are Canadian. Like they may have Asian history, but they're Canadian.
Yeah. I think when you talk government, that's probably the key there, because that wasn't happening in the US in terms of.
There was no money in it.
Yeah.
Americans, more so than Canadians, want to see profit.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that Canadians don't want to be successful. Of course they do. But my dog needs to go pee. Hang on. Sorry.
Okay. Take a break. My lips are getting dry. Yeah, we've already gone 2 hours here. Are you good to go for a little bit longer?
A little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, who knows? I'm not an expert on business. I just feel like there is a deeper commitment to domestic manufacturing in Canada than there is on the coast to high level stuff. Obviously, you've got these cool, like, you still have all these neat little denim factories across the United States, and North Carolina does amazing things. And there's really cool needle industry in the United States. I just don't, the commitment to technical outerwear and wanting to stay competitive.
Yeah.
Some of the imported stuff. Anyway, all of Arc'teryx is made offshore now anyway.
Yeah, that has shifted. I want to talk about then from there, we've talked a bit about your experience going from Arc'teryx into the North Face, Patagonia, the North Face again. You've worked at these really top tier outdoor brands, and you've got to experience success there, challenges, opportunities, all kinds of things. But what I really wanted to talk about was your feeling of being regenerative or sustainable and doing the right thing and trying to do what you thought was the right thing within these companies. I want to talk a little bit about that, and then why that pushed into farming, that transition of what were you trying to then, once you established yourself in these brands, then what were you trying to accomplish that eventually led you towards regenerative farming?
I think my drive when I was at big brands is probably pretty similar to anybody else there. You want to build good quality, interesting product that has a reason to be. When I had to do the cheap tier rainwear for Patagonia, that was just like so painful. But like you want to see the brand that you're working for be successful. I think that it's really pivotal to, I was always really clear with myself that my success wasn't because of any particular product. It was because it was the right product for that brand at that time. My success was measured on whether I had done a good job understanding what the brand needed and then developing and building a product for that position. Yeah. It's not whether I had a good idea. It's whether my idea was fleshed out and aligned with what the brand needed. It's about whether it's a good fit. Yeah. And that's why you try not to take the losses personal too. It's always hard when you've worked hard on something and it gets pulled. It's always disappointing. But at the same time, I didn't take it personally because it didn't mean that the product was shit. It just meant that the timing wasn't right or right brand, or it wasn't whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of my ideas are shit. Sometimes people catch that for you.
You have to, but you also can't, every idea can't be amazing. You have to do a whole bunch of shit to get to the good stuff. As you get better, more of your original ideas become amazing, right? That's just, as we get better, we weed out the shitty ideas pretty fast. But when you're early on, you got to try them. You got to try things. That's what research and development is about.
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the biggest thing, if I could say any message to big brands, it would be you're having a healthy social and creative energy in the building is probably the most important thing. People want to be there. They want to be a part of it. Damn, is that important? And number two is, yeah, to create that space for people to explore. And sometimes it will seem like a waste of money, but you never know where that idea is going, where that's going to evolve. What is that going to lead to? We did some pretty big projects that came up with pretty cool product that didn't go anywhere. That sonic welding stuff. And
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
yeah, that climb, what do we call it? Climb flight or something? I don't know. Is that the Polar Tech soft shell stuff with the tweave on the outside? That jacket was sick, but we didn't sell any.
Yeah. And that's unfortunate that a lot of that stuff, that's what happens because it's not needed in the marketplace at that time. It's not marketed. It's not the right fit for the brand. It's all these pieces that have to come together. It's amazing that we have as much success with our products that we do because all these things need to align. And it is a little an art and science and intuitive process that we go through. And then you throw shit against the wall and see what sticks. Sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. And so it's a tender, tricky thing. I think the gray thing, and sometimes you get it right and sometimes you don't get it right, is how far to let things go before you plug. Because you are going to learn from that process, and it may lead to something other over here that was amazing that you didn't see coming. But at the same time, you can go down a rat hole too.
Yeah. Yeah. Where did the sustainability thing really start to come in for you? Like really start to grow and push?
So sustainability for me personally, I have been sewing clothes out of hemp and silk blends. I've been 100% natural fiber person as long as I can remember. I did think that plastic had a place, and it probably still does. I remember, you probably don't remember this, but do you remember Susie Tompkins from Esprit when she did her own eco line?
Very vaguely.
Under the Esprit umbrella?
Yeah, vaguely.
Yeah, right into that. And I always followed Patagonia because of its commitment to the outdoors, or commitment to the planet. So the environmental piece has been percolating below for as long as I can remember, my whole life. I've always preferred natural fibers. I'll never forget, like for a while, I was working in design at Arc'teryx, but because at times I had been the contract coordinator, there was some shit that went down and I had to save a whole bunch of salesman samples. So I got pulled out of design and sent back out to do contract coordination for salesman samples season. And I was driving a VW van still. And I obviously don't like to drive that around. And so I was always riding my bike. And so I started going to see the contract coordinators, or to visit contractors on my bike. And then Jeremy Gard, the president, got wind that I was riding my bike over the factories, and he flipped out and he went and rented me a car. He said, "I'm not paying you to ride your bike to the factory." He said, "This is ridiculous." But what I did learn in that time is that I had this sweater. Like, I didn't have much money, right? I think I was getting paid like $28,000 a year. And I could make myself out of any fabric, whatever I wanted. And I was always making myself cool fleeces and blah, 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 and mountain bike specific shit. And I even dabbled with my own little line for a bit. And I had this old merino sweater that was cut and sew. It was like more open, more textured, and more air space than the icebreaker fine gauge knits. Like it was more spidery than that.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I was wearing that instead of a fleece. It was like the same weight as like 100-weight fleece, and it was very light. It wasn't heavy like the icebreaker stuff. Yeah. It wasn't as dense. And anyway, so I had started wearing this sweater, and it dawned on me one day that when I rode my bike across town in my Arc'teryx fleece, it smelled. And when I rode my bike across town in this wool sweater, It didn't smell. People weren't even, Icebreaker, I don't even think it was around. We weren't really promoting wool. Of course, wool has been an outdoor from the beginning. It was the beginning. But at that time, wool wasn't really a thing.
No, it had gone out of fashion.
Out of fashion because it was expensive. And we did have, Michael Blankhorn had this really cool roll of 100% wool fleece that was made by Malden Mills under his table. And I was always like, let me make myself a hoodie out of it. You show me the pattern, maybe I'll give you the fabric. I never got around to it. And it was this hideous shade of orange, but it was sick wool fleece. Anyway.
Nice.
So yeah, so I learned on really quickly that wool was way better. And so I wore like hemp canvas because I was really into army pants that I had modified into bike shorts, made like I sewed them up, put crotch gussets in them and shit like that. Anyway, yeah. So
I want to see
these like hemp German army pant shorts with my wool sweaters.
Nice.
Yeah. So anyways, sustainability. So yeah, I was pretty committed all along, definitely always trying to get a little bit of wool in there. It was often too expensive. I loved the Schoeller because it had the wool in there. I've been into wools as long as I can remember, and as a performance textile. And the North Face, we just, in terms of sustainability, it was always around durability. And I don't think that you should compromise the technical performance of the textile for your green story. I struggled with that at Patagonia. When I was really excited, that was the reason I went to Patagonia, was because of the footprint project and because I wanted to learn on how to develop more sustainable products. And I was disappointed.
Yeah, you said that it was not living up to your imagined expectations of what was going to happen there.
Yeah, I feel like most of the green stuff we were doing at that time was in sportswear, not in technical. We were trying to do recycled, but I felt that these poly packages that we were trying to utilize were a real compromise. That poly film, the poly face, the glue film that was holding them together, the durability wasn't there. And that fabric, honestly, they don't use it anymore, so I can say this, but it's shit. That felt bad making jackets out of it. And then they moved over to work with somebody that will remain nameless. We all have those people. Anyway, the guy that charged ridiculous amounts of money to develop gore for them. That was Pat. He swooped in after I left. And but I think going gore was the right move. And we were really close to launching a really cool down cluster, synthetic down cluster, way better than a fiber fill bullshit thing. That was so bad. Anyway, but we were really close to Patagonia, and then Primaloft said no. But so anyway, I think that, and now I think that Patagonia is more about sales. I don't know. The fact that they're putting polyester in their organic cotton just makes me.
Yeah, it's a weird game right now that everyone is trying to play. There's no answer to it, right? This is what I think is interesting about, without digging into that whole shit show of what's going on there, people are trying things, there's whatever going on. What I think is interesting is because of what you start to learn and see in your experience, from your life experience up to that point, and then what you start to see within these companies, getting to a point when you really realize that you can no longer work within that and make the change, that you decide to really go in such a different direction, which is actually not that different for you when you think about your history. And to really tackle it into regenerative farming and working with wool.
And I just the answers weren't there. And I think every time we make textiles, we have to ask ourselves, like, we have to close the loop. What is happening with this? And doing 100% polyester and 100% organic cotton makes way more sense. The minute you're doing these intimate blends, whether you're putting polyester into the wool to make it cheaper, or you're putting polyester into your organic cotton to make it cheaper, Like, you got to ask yourself, you got to go look in the mirror. You
Yeah.
got to look in the mirror.
Yeah.
Do you want that in your dirt? Would you put that in your garden? Would you grow your carrots in that and then feed it to your baby?
Yeah.
Because if not, you shouldn't be making money on it.
And then you have to start thinking about, how can I live with this? How can I sit with this? I know I had the similar feeling of when so many high loft fleeces were starting to be sold. And you start selling 1 million of one style a
Yeah.
year, and you start thinking about the polyplastics and the microplastics everywhere, and you go, I can't keep doing this same thing. I'm not going to make any change here by continuously making more money doing this.
Yeah.
And you think, what am I going to do? And I think getting into the whole farm is another podcast of really talking about the forward looking future of what you're doing. But, and I know that your process of going from corporate design into running a farm isn't just about making that choice and going, I'm going to do something totally different. There's all these other steps of being a parent and life and all these stuff that happen to get you there. But do you want to talk about that point from corporate design to then where you are today in the farming? What is that through line?
So I just really couldn't be a part of it anymore. It just didn't align with my values enough. And so John finally, well, not finally, but John took a very senior level position. And at that point, we made a conscious choice that he was going to carry the torch, that I could no longer maintain a job where I was traveling and support him. You can't really, unless you have a nanny, you can't really, because up until that point, the North Face had been pretty good about he and I trading off. John did show up as a parent, and we made a conscious choice together and said, you know what? If you take on this senior management position, you can't not go to the sales meeting because your wife has to go.
Right. The trade-offs, certain trade-offs.
Yeah. So you move into a different salary bracket, and finally we didn't need my income as much. And yeah, so there was a lot of things that lined up there. John loves to be able to operate a chainsaw and a hatchet. And yeah, so it made sense. He likes to build stuff. And so it aligned for us to move here to Bowen. I wanted the kids to experience what I had on our little hobby farm. It had been so gratifying and so meaningful for me as a child that I just wanted to share that experience with my own children.
Yeah.
I tried homeschooling, I tried a bunch of things, didn't really know what I was trying to do because I knew our piece of land here is so small. Is that, what are you going to do? I'm not a very good carrot farmer. And yeah, vegetables escape me, man. I can grow enough for my family, and you always have too much or not enough. I'm not a very good vegetable farmer. And I knew I wanted livestock. I knew I wanted the wool. They came first. And then I just figured it out as I went. I was a vegetarian for 30 years, right?
Yeah.
And I really thought that it was the most environmentally responsible thing to do. And it hasn't been until my farming practice, until I look my sheep in the eye when I'm dropping them off at the abattoir, until I've eaten my own chickens. It hasn't been until this process of understanding that we need grazing animals. We need their shit to feed the microbes. Like it's this process that you can't grow carrots in the middle of the prairies. Like, vegetables are highly intensive agriculture product that requires a lot of manure. And what vegans don't get is that you have to have the shit to grow the vegetables. And there's very limited land base on our world, on our globe, that actually has soil quality rich enough to grow vegetables. Like grass, we can grow almost anywhere, but vegetables, not so much. So anyway, so I've learned so much while trying to run my own farm, and learned about local mills and learned this and learned that, blah, blah, blah. And I had fantasies of having this studio where like people could come and work umbrella, small brands, and that sort of shifted and changed. And yeah, basically at this point, I realized that living in Canada with the cost of living here, I can't afford to farm. I cannot pay the mortgage. I don't really want to pay my mortgage from raising sheep. I want to raise sheep with purpose so that I'm a good steward of the land, so that I'm generating enough manure for my flower business and for some food, that I want it to be all part of this sustainable hub that all fits together. And the way to pay for that is to be sharing and offering something to your community. For me, doing accommodations, events, and workshops allows me to farm.
Yeah.
And it also builds that community, because I don't know about you, but what I want to foster in my life is meaningful community. Like I love creative synergy. I love watching people come to the farm and feel good being here. It's like watching a child in public. Like when they have a conversation with somebody and you observe them interacting in a positive way with the world, it's like the most, and it's the same when people come here and they pick my flowers and they love them and they just love being here. It's so fine.
Yeah, and I feel that. I was telling you the last time we talked that when I look at your website, because you've also, really had it professionally photographed, and your website looks beautiful, and the way that you share things, though, even just really naturally, it's like I get drawn into it. I go, oh my God, I want to go there. Like, when can I'll do a workshop. I'll go visit Star and be part of that, because you can feel the energy, you can feel the love in it, and it draws you in. And to me, that also is why the design work was so successful, why your pieces were so successful, why I feel like I had that success as well, is because of the love and the passion and the drive that we would fight to put into the things. And I love to see it remanifesting as regenerating into a new part of your life and career, where you've learned all of these things and you're putting it now into something that is so truly a reflection of you and your passions.
And it's moving into that stage of our life where we're giving, sharing, right? Like I'm not collecting as much anymore. I'm a lifelong learner and I'm still collecting, but I'm also, I want to share it. Like I get my gratification has shifted. Some of it's the aging process, and also some of it is thinking that getting your jacket on the front of Outdoor magazine was going to be this, and it wasn't.
Right.
I remember growing up listening to the song, getting on the cover of the Rolling Stone. So for me, getting on the cover of Outside magazine, and then I was there and I was like, nah.
It's never.
It was like, oh, that's a cool picture.
Yeah, it's never what you think, because and you move beyond it but there's a life after, and that's where the meaning. And I think we're talking about this stage of our lives now is about service, about giving back, and it's about building community. And we're also really all about that now post COVID, that we need, because we need it. It's necessary.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Everything has to be reinvented. And when I talk about design leadership, I want to wrap up. There's so much more I could talk with you about, and we will in the future, but is that design leadership doesn't just happen inside companies. It doesn't have, it's for us as designers, it's our lives. We design our lives. We design what we want our lives to be like over time, but we're learning about ourselves. And that's what design and creativity is. You're learning about yourself every step of the way. And that hands-on work, that is, like you were saying, like that connection to your hands, to your body, to creating something. We created in our children, in our farms, in our lives, in everything we put out there. And to me, that's design leadership. It's finding out who we are as we regenerate and evolve. And what are we going to create, and what do we stand for, and how are we going to make that happen in our lifetime? And it's just beautiful to see you doing that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
it's like a fire, right? Like you can't, I don't even know how to express drive for me, but when I hone in on something, it keeps you up at night. Like you just like hyperdrive. And it changes. Now I'm older, and I'm totally embracing it. I don't know. Like when I go down to the States and everybody dyes their hair, I'm like, in Canada, like, I'd say it's like maybe 50-50. I remember going to Disneyland with my kids, and I was the only person my age with gray hair. There was lots of grandmas with gray hair, but I'm like, there was no like middle-aged women with gray hair. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm so gray.
Yeah.
Um,
But it works. It's the
well, it's
wisdom. It's the wisdom coming through too. And
so wisdom, and
know,
it's authenticity too.
yeah. And I agree. I don't dye my hair. It's under the hat. It's hiding. And so I can whatever. But there's that embracing the wisdom instead of always trying to be young, that obsession with youth and being young in your heart and what you're doing in your life. But right now, to me, it's like there's wisdom that our generation has, and it's time for us to step in and share it like that. And so I'm so incredibly inspired by my colleagues like you who are doing these things. And that's why I wanted to talk about it. And what I would love to do is have you back again in the future to talk about the farming and where it's going, because I know you're going through some transitions also with it now. But because there's so many people that want to know about that. And I know you've talked about that in podcasts before, but your plans going forward and where things go with workshops and all of the creative process. But right here, I really wanted to share your background and your history up and to getting to this point. And I think that's really inspirational for a lot of people, because people think it's this linear path, and it never is. For anybody I ever talked to in a creative field, it's such a crazy, interesting story to me.
For sure, because you have to gain enough insight and enough tools in order to choose where you're going next. And you don't know exactly where you're going to find those. And I would say for me, I was going to say something, now I lost my train of thought. But in terms of the farm, you probably know this location is for sale, and I am in the process of finding something more than probably 20 times this size. And yeah, so that I can really truly apply proper grazing strategy and regenerative farming. So I make sure that I am adding more than I'm taking. That's really my next goal, is figuring out, to me, sustainability is not reducing impact, it's eliminating impact where we can. If my sheep if I am bringing any inputs onto the farm, that they are enhancing and not drawing away. And I don't know how to get there with energy yet, but I know with the sheep, it's actually fairly easy if you have enough pasture, and the flowers and all that kind of stuff. That's easy. Like, I don't fertilize anything except for like compost teas and stuff like that. And anyway.
Any last words?
No, I think, what are my last words?
Yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, for me, I know it's so cliche. It's such a buzzword. I hate buzzwords, but it's about being true to yourself, right? It really is about figuring out what feels good in your body.
Yeah.
I do have one quick thing I wanted to say. There is an artist, and I can never remember his name. I could Google it and find it for you. But he is from LA. He's a graphic designer or illustrator, graphics guy. I was at a cool little mini art gallery, tied into the Patagonia crowd, but it was in San Francisco. Some surfer artist, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, he had a picture, and I can't even remember what the image is now. I've got to find it. But anyway, it's an image of his hands or something. And it's, my mind is asleep when my hands are thinking, I think it says. Just like, we share that message with more people, because what I see in the world is so much anxiousness, and I feel it too, like out of COVID, like the tension, so tight.
Yeah.
And it's like, I see it in my teenagers, I see it in their friends, and I'm like, I think we're on the precipice of a major social movement. And I think this is like the energy building up against it, because we haven't figured out what it looks like yet. But I also think that it's returning to things that are so basic. There's so much scientific research right now that doing things with your hands is healthy for your nervous system. So if you can combine being outside and doing shit with your hands, and those two things together, helping regulate. There's one thing I can teach my children now for the rest of their, as long as they're with me, is about, we all have to manage our own nervous system, right? It's like we live in a world right now anyway, that's so high strung and got to regulate it ourselves. And you know all about that through martial arts. Wow.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. You talked about it with the knitting on the plane and whatnot to keep your head clear, get through time. And it's what we call a moving meditation, so that you move out of that space and into that. And I think singing, same thing, music, playing music. I think that's why I took up learning music later on in life. That moving the hands has always been an incredibly important thing for me, being obsessed with hands and that. And so what you say, it resonates in that feeling of regulating your nervous system. I've never heard anybody say that. And I think that's something that is important to say, because we can hear that, go, oh, regulating my nervous system. What is all of this technology and social media doing to my nervous system? And so there are other podcasters and doctors and people out there talking more about this as well, of how we need to regulate ourselves and be healthy. So I think that's an awesome takeaway.
And not just to be healthy, but when we were talking about like inner office dynamics and stuff like that, or the creative process, regulating yourself and your own nervous system helps you be in that place of cooperation or collaboration.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing all of this.
Yeah, thank you.
And spending the time again. I love talking with you. You have been listening to UnStruktured, the podcast from Struktur Society. If you enjoyed this episode, please download, share, like, subscribe, and add your thoughts and suggestions in the comments. Also, please consider a Substack paid subscription to help us bring even more meaningful content and connection points to you and our creator community. Here you will find articles and news, as well as the podcast and additional content. We cannot grow without you. Thanks for listening, and talk to you soon.